Okay, we're going to go ahead and call our meeting to order. Let's see, we will start with Pledge of Allegiance. If all would rise, please. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry. All right, and
I tried to shoot myself an email to remember.
Kyle, since it's in front of you, Commissioner Dodson, do you mind doing a roll call?
Not at all. Brian Chena.
He's here.
Brian.
Oh, Brian Chena.
Brian's here.
Present.
Presented.
Thank you. Liz Curry.
Here.
Commissioner Kevin Garrison. Commissioner Charlie Giannoni. Commissioner Patrick Halliday.
Here.
Commissioner David Kirk.
Here.
Commissioner Kat Kleeman just went to the car. Commissioner Alan Matson. Commissioner Mark Porter. Commissioner Stephanie Seguino.
Here.
Commissioner Scott Shumsky. Commissioner Miriam Stoll.
Here.
Commissioner Ben Truman.
He's on his way.
Student Rep Xander Long.
You'll be here, but late.
Student Rep Georgia Essig. Okay.
All right, thanks for everyone. Sorry about the delay on Tuesday night, but with uncertain weather, especially at the time the meeting was going to get out, we were cautious about putting people on the road, and on short notice, people came tonight, and I know that not all board members were able to make it here tonight. Kat is here too, so that's
Yeah,
right.
I was just counting.
No, she's here. We're going to start this. If we can get an approval of the agenda, a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Commissioner Seguino, seconded by Commissioner Stoll. Any amendments to the agenda? All in favor of the agenda as proposed?
Aye.
Any opposition? We're going to go a little out of order from typical where we have public comment at this time because we have the EMS robotics team, or also known as the Vermonster Roboticists, coached by Kevin Grace and Eric Shems. These are the state champion robotics team who also went to New Hampshire, I think, or are going to New Hampshire to take their competition to even the next level. Not all of the team members are able to be here tonight, but I'm going to read off all the team members. We have Caleb Russo, Hussein Tamang, sorry if I'm mispronouncing anyone's name, Leah Mihuk, Emily Budaman, Isadora Bailey Hall, Cortina Barbieri, Sam Weber, and Owen Moran. And they're going to do a little explanation of what the roboticists do, and hopefully a demonstration.
Thanks for having us, giving this opportunity to attend the meeting. I know that this is about kids, so we're going to turn this over to them as much as possible. But we wanted to share just a little overview of what this group has been up to. They've been working after school since the first Monday of school in September. So they've been working for some time. We started out 2 days a week, and I think by the time we got to New Hampshire for the regional championships, we were up to 4 days a week for multiple hours each day. So it was quite a commitment and dedication by all 10 members of this team. They were, just want to tell you, a couple of parts to this project. It's not just a robotics competition, but it's a student-centered, real-world learning opportunity for them. You want to talk a little bit about what we had to do?
Well, there's 4 main ideas or areas that are looked at when you're judged for the FLL robotics competition. The first is the actual robot's performance on the challenge board. The challenge board consists of multiple problems made out of Legos that you program a robot like this one and to complete. The second part is project and presentation, which you're given a theme and you find a problem and a solution. The third part is working together as a team, or core values. They judge you on doing an activity and how well you can complete that activity and work as a team. The fourth part is the executive design. The executive design is on how you design your robot and how it works. So you go a little deeper into the mechanics of parts and ideas for the robot.
So I'm Eric Shems. We were very fortunate to have a couple veterans this year like Cortina along with some new members of our team like Sam this year, make the time and make the commitment after school to participate in this. And the project-based learning aspect of it and the problem-based learning was huge for these guys. They had to develop their own solutions to real-world problems and figure out how to solve those solutions. And you'll see in just a moment, they came up with some very innovative ideas.
The theme this year was learning and how can we improve learning. First, we had to find out about learning. Then we had to figure out who's in need of improved learning. And then we had to decide a solution to that learning so that it improves for everybody. These kids met with psychologists to ask questions about just learning, and what they came up with was an app that is designed to improve learning for kids who they found to be most neediest. And those are kids who come from families that have less structure than are needed. In other words, no matter what you do to improve learning for any group of people, if they're in an unstructured, unstable home, what happens is that learning is compromised. So this group targeted that group and tried to figure out, well, what can we do to improve it? And what they came up with was this app in action. So this was a script that they wrote and an app that they designed, and I'll just hear more about it at the end. This is very short, or I should say not very long. Sound starts in about 20 seconds.
I'm so glad Miss Grace is agreed in our pilot program, All Failing Balance. This volunteer program is ideal for any parent wishing to improve their communication with their child while helping build math skills.
And let's not forget about the progress little Leo's made in my class. I expect to see high marks on the report.
Hey, it's Family Balance time. Look, let's find out what our family balance activity is. All right. It looks like it's guess my number. All right, the rules say we need to use cards, and I'm going to show you a card, and it's 1 through 10, and you have to figure out my number. Well, shouldn't you be so you think you're going to show me the card? I'm not going to show you. Ready? Guess my number. 5. If I have 5 and I take away 2, what number 3. Do I have? Did you get it? Yeah! Ba la la la! Okay, so now I get to take a picture and send it to your guidance counselor to show you how many cards you got right. Hopefully she's proud. Oh, she'll be so proud.
All right, class, there's going to be a pop quiz today.
Ooh, this should be easy. I worked on math last night.
How'd your quiz go?
I nailed it. I did good in math class today. Excellent. Family balance.
So Cortina, you want to talk quickly about that app a little bit?
Okay, so our app started being based on all people in unstable homes. And sometimes there's different levels of unstableness. There could be people who are geared towards starting to learn about, starting to work towards becoming unstable and having connections with their kid. And that's what the final product this app is aimed for. We started, like Mr. Gray said, talking to a psychologist named Dr. Chandler, and we interviewed him, and he seemed to keep bringing up children in unstable homes as targets of needed learning. So we took that and decided to dive a little deeper. We did some research and realized that actually he was right. There are almost all kids in unstable homes will have a lot better chance of just doing well later in life. So we decided to focus that as our main problem. We kept researching, and we realized that we needed an innovative way that was automatic. Something that would get the parents to be able to connect with their kid while not having to go to a website and actually do stuff. Because sometimes when you're in unstable homes, parents are really busy and they don't have the time to go to a website and find out. So we decided that an app would be a best choice, because normally if you have a smartphone, an app could be an automatic touchscreen, or in this case, this app sends a notification. So, like you saw in the video, you could be doing whatever you were doing that day, and you might get a notification that comes up and lets you know and reminds you to spend time with your kids. If you clicked on that notification, it would take you to some app screens that would involve giving you tonight's challenge, what it might be, and then giving you a calendar to see how many you've completed, points counts, and ways to contact your guidance counselor. The app would be initiated by the kids' counselors, by the guidance counselor working with the family at the school. And so you could email them or connect them and comment on this page, and they would be able to view a progress report of the family's work throughout the time getting through the stages of family balance. So these are a few screens. They're ones that we put together to demonstrate, and our final conclusion is an app called Family Balance that takes math and getting families to be together and puts it into one.
We believe so much in this app that another opportunity presented itself, I guess in October, mid-October-ish, and that was the Verizon App Challenge. It's something that Verizon puts out, $20,000 cash prize for schools for developing an original app, and we have entered this into that. We find out in January how we did. I really do think they've done quite well. There are regional awards as well as national, so that's out there pending. We'll see how we do on that. But that was just part of this project. We did have to, obviously it's a robotics competition. Everybody competes on a 4-foot by 8-foot table. Everybody has identical design setup, and you have to accomplish as many different missions as possible. Sam, why don't you step forward? Sam was one of our lead programmers and designers. So I'll just give you a very quick taste of what it looks like in New Hampshire at the competition. It's a side-by-side competition, but really your points are cumulative throughout the day. First thing is open the door. What was the door standing for?
The door to learning.
The door to learning. So everything's based on learning and education.
So the robot has to run completely autonomously from challenge to challenge, and you can swap out different attachments and different design solutions for solving each one of the challenges.
You have a total of 2 minutes and 30 seconds to complete as many as possible.
So it goes by very quickly, and this team did very well in the state of Vermont. When we went down to the regional championships in New Hampshire, we did see a new level of competition. We were impressed. We learned a lot as a team, and look forward to competing again next year. And now you get a kind of a glimpse of the robot in action, kind of close up.
And what's great about this is this work's being done in the classroom as well as after school. So this is a typical type of design challenge that kids would have in a design and tech class at Edmonds Middle School. We have 10 of these that children use in class, and probably 60 to 80 students a year get this experience. There's a lot of ways you can solve each one of these challenges. The programming involves a modular code that the kids have to write, where they can control the runtime for servo motors based on degrees, rotations, or a time interval. And they can program each block of code independently. So these guys are learning robotic design and modular coding, all wrapped into one package.
And this was our last, we call this our home run move here at the end for quite a few points here. And that was actually successful there. So that's a little bit about that. If anybody has any questions, then we can let you get back to your meeting.
Thank you for the presentation. I don't have any questions, but I just want to say how incredibly impressed I am that when you were talking about, well, first your learning query of how kids learn, and then you went to talk to the psychiatrist, and I thought you were going to say, you know, kids learn experientially or audibly or visually, and that I'm just so impressed by your compassion that you chose, you know, kind of a more fundamental challenge to take on, and that you really kind of dove in at that deeper level, and then you also obviously had a lot of fun too. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Commissioner Dotson.
Thank you. I also want to add my accolades for the commitment on the part of the faculty and the commitment of the students. And I have a question. I just wonder what your thinking is about how well marketed this opportunity is and how well celebrated it is. It seems like we're caught in conversations often about accelerated learning opportunities, and I would think this certainly fits into that, ways for all sorts of extensions of classroom learning and connections, and it would also strike me that there are a lot of people in the community that don't know something like this exists. So I would just want us to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunity in terms of all students knowing it exists and even being supported. They're probably, you know, that perennial thing of a student in a classroom who, for whatever reason, the traditional curriculum's not working for them, and they could use some kind of little excitement or something that gets them where their, you know, where their interest is, and to make sure that the message is out in the district. Make sure you're making this opportunity available to students, all of that, so we can just optimize this really wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. We did have sent it out. We started last year, was our first year competing, and then this year we did go to Hunt Middle School, and we actually did get a robotics program in place after school. We didn't quite get to the level where we can compete at this competition, but it was now being offered through the after-school program at Hunt. So now it's not about the resources, it's about finding people that are willing to donate their time to make this happen. So we're getting closer.
I have a question. Can we download the app?
Not yet. That's
Not
part
yet.
of the Verizon App Challenge. They are going to help us develop it into an actual working app.
Okay.
At this point, it's just based on the idea of what you want to happen.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Apparently, Commissioner Halliday is looking for a little bit of balance.
And, well, congratulations to the whole team. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Stoll.
What was the most fun thing about the experience for each of you?
I think it was just like meeting other kids, because a lot of times at school it's very isolated. I mean, I feel like when you're in your classroom and on your team, I don't get the opportunity to meet sixth graders and other 7th and 8th graders, because the teams are quite isolated in different classes and different schedules. But I like after school, because it's just an opportunity to meet new people and to get to know people that are different ages and just different and new.
How about you, Sam? What was the most fun for you?
I have to say also meeting new people, especially because I'm not actually in middle school yet. So now I know a lot of people that are going to be in the same school as I am next year.
Sam actually goes to Champlain Elementary School. He was the youngest member of our robotics team. So it was a great opportunity for Sam, and he really rose to the occasion. What an opportunity to go into middle school now with the comfort level that he has. Not only just moving or navigating around the building, but knowing 6th, 7th, and 8th graders right now. Good for him.
I just want to say you guys are awesome for doing this. And also, I'm also really curious. The kids on the team, you guys are going to be the best ambassadors for this in terms of getting everyone in the school involved in Champlain. And I really hope to see more of this with across the board, not just at Hunt, but you can be in elementary school too, as well?
Yes, it's actually grades 4 through 8 are part of the first LEGO League age group.
Right, and then there are older groups as well.
There is another level of robotics.
There is another team that's run by parents right now working with 4th and 5th graders that my younger sister is in, and so they just got the taste of the competition, and they got to kind of experience the different levels, so that when they come into 6th grade next year or 5th grade, they'll get a chance and they'll know more about it and they'll have a backstory. So that's also working at Champlain, and it's run by parents.
Very good. It's exciting. Thank you.
Congratulations on your success.
Great. Yeah, Laura?
I just thought, just observing the pairing of fabulous program and fabulous school board and administration, I'm curious, it's kind of a interesting question, but what is the compensation like for staff that's working with the team at the middle school? Because I observed as a parent, Cortina's commitment go from 2 hours a week, then 4 hours a week, then 6 and 8 at the end for 3 weeks in a row. And so are you like considered as part of your school program, or is there an after-school funding that provides for your support?
We did get a small stipend through the after-school program for coaching the team.
But it was finite whether or not they proceeded on, or?
We left at 3 in the morning on Saturday to get down to Nashua for a 7:30 start. So.
It was not an hourly wage figure. It was a lump sum, and it wasn't very large. I mean, it really wasn't about that for Eric and myself.
Yeah, so I just wanted to put on the record a plug for staff and supporting these programs and what it can do for kids, and appreciate your words, Commissioner Dotson, regarding the possibilities and the extensions, and let's get this word out. And I don't think his intent was making the teachers feel like they had to share about the programs, like sort of setting it from the bottom up within the schools, and I support that too. It's been awesome for my daughter, and I'm sure for many other families. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. So we have Cortina Barbieri, Sam Weber, Kevin Grayson, Eric Shems, and you guys, it's a lot different than Mr. Holt's leatherworking class that I took in 8th grade. You guys have come a long way for tech ed, so thank you very much. At this point, we're going to open up for public comment. Someone, Bob, can you hand me the sign-in sheet? I don't know what we have. You good? Everybody's good? First up for public comment tonight, Kathy Chasen.
Thank you. I have several questions, so I'm going to share anyway. I'm involved with a few community groups, and these are some questions that have come up. What's happening with the purchase of St. Joseph's School? What's happening about the coming overcrowding at Hunt? We'd like an update on the accessibility issues at BHS. We're wondering what kind of training's been done to bring in the Common Core. And we're wondering what progress is being made with staff on diversity training. What will happen to the Taft and Horizon students? Sorry, the on-top and Horizon students. And what are the expenses involved in replacing Jeannie Collins? Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Kathy was the only person who had signed up in advance. Is there anyone else who would like to come for public comment, please? If you just state your name, too.
Yeah, I'm Cleary Buckley. I live in the New North End, and I'm a parent of a kindergartner at Edmonds Elementary. And I came to talk about accessibility at Edmonds Elementary, but unfortunately I have to just start with the fact that I got here and the accessible entrance to City Hall was locked. And so I didn't have to wait very long before Mr. Porter kindly let me in, but...
Sorry, this is not my name tag.
Oh, okay. Well, this gentleman right here, I caught him just before he came in and yelled, and he came down and let me in. But I think I've said enough on that. I spoke about a month ago at, I think it's the ICC committee. Is that?
ITC.
ITC, sorry. I'm fairly new to the school process, but when we went to an orientation at Edmonds Elementary, we discovered that only the ground floor is accessible. There's no elevator. I had known that there was an elevator installed at Edmonds, but apparently it's only the middle school. And I'm very interested in being involved with my son's education, so I'm here to advocate for keeping the accessibility project, which is already planned for, at, high on the list of priorities. It's not just about me. In fact, I'm probably a small reason to do it, but it's about kids who are disabled being in an inclusive environment. It's about kids who are temporarily disabled, being able to continue their studies. I know from the principal that there is currently a student who has suffered an injury that is not really able to navigate the stairs, and their education may be compromised. And it's about inclusion, and I think that's something that we as a community care about, and I just, I want to keep coming to these things and making it clear that I think this is a priority and it's something that needs to be addressed, and so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clary. Is there anyone further for public comment? We set aside time at the end of every public comment for reflection. Are there any board members who would like to make any reflections? Hearing none, we will move on. Board report. First thing we have on our board report is a Partnership for Change update. Commissioner Chena.
I'd like to invite Susie King up to present on some of the work of the Partnership for Change.
She needs speakers.
I think she brought them with her laptop.
Okay, because I have a speaker hook right here. Do you want to plug in? Are you doing a projection too? While we're moving forward here, I'm just going to jump down a couple things on other parts of the board report. I do want to remind either current commissioners who are thinking of running for school board again, or anyone in the public who's in the audience here, watching at home, who might be interested in looking into becoming a school board member. All of the seats in the city are up for re-election this town meeting day, the 3rd of March, I believe it is this year. Because of redistricting, we are going to be moving from 14 seats to 12 seats. We're also moving from 7 wards to 8 wards. There will be 1 representative from each ward, and then there are 4 districts that are being built that will have a representative who will represent kind of 2 wards comprise a district. So 8 from each, 1 from each of the 8 districts, and then each of the 8 wards, and then 4 from the districts. And so that there will be staggered going forward for the all seats that are being elected on town meeting day for the wards are 3-year seats. I believe I have that right. I'm looking for my notes. I didn't grab it. I'll check at the end of this. But our 3-year seats, and the seats that are for the districts, the north, south, central, and east, I believe they're called, are 2-year seats. No. Did I say that right? 2-year seats for the districts, 3-year seats for the wards, and then I'll be on a rotating 2 years after that. But I'll turn it back to you, Commissioner Gino.
Yeah. First, I just want to pass around a paper that you can look at when I refer to it.
People not here.
Is it better if I sit or stand? I'm gonna sit then.
Watching the speech, whether to sit or stand.
Thanks. So my name is Susie King, and I'm an ELL teacher at Burlington High School. And I'm also a partner teacher through the Partnership for Change. I co-teach this a class with Beth Evans, who wasn't able to be here tonight, so it's just me. The class that we teach is called Excel, and Excel is a class for some of the newest English language learners at Burlington High School who have very low proficiency in English, and it meets every day for a block, which is 90 minutes. This is a picture of some of the students in our class. They come from several different countries, including Burma, Congo, Nepal, Somalia, and more recently, Iraq. They're not in this picture, though. All of these students come with varying education, from going to school every day, just not in English, to not really going to school very much. And they're in high school. Excel is a proficiency-based class. This is the document here. Proficiency-based means we have a certain set of expectations that the students will be able to show that they can do. And once they show they can do each one, they move to the next one. Some examples of the proficiencies in Excel are being able to introduce yourself in English, talking about the weather in English, telling time in English, knowing your school schedule, including your teachers' names in English. The class is also a fluid enrollment class, and what that means is that the students, once they show they can do these 11 things, they advance to other ELL classes. It's individually targeted. This means that not every single new ELL student who comes to Burlington High School is in this class. All students are given a placement test, and only students who have very low proficiency in English are in this class. In addition, we have a strong home connection. Because we're partner teachers, we've been given extra time to do different things. And so one of the things that Beth and I do, along with a multilingual liaison, is to visit each family's home. We do this to make a connection with the parents or guardians. We also do this to interview the parents further on the student's educational background, and just also to explain about our class, kind of how I'm explaining to you right now. Our class has some community connections. We have a connection with the Flynn Center for the Performing Arts. We have a Flynn Arts educator, Lyda Winfield, who comes to our class almost once a week. When Lyda comes, it's awesome. The kids are learning English through kinesthetics, so dance and movement and being creative. And in addition, many of our students have experienced some major trauma. And because of this, we have made a connection with the Center for Mindful Learning. And we have a Center for Mindful Learning staff member who comes nearly once a week, they're various people, to work on mindfulness with our students and us, teachers. We know that in Vermont right now, everybody is talking about budgets being cut and enrollment, school enrollment, going down. Here is our reality. Right now, BHS has around 140 English language learners. The enrollment, the general enrollment at Burlington High School has stayed the same. The ELL enrollment has increased. Since April, Burlington High School has enrolled 45 English language learners. 20 of them were in Excel. This means that they are very low proficiency in English. The students in Excel and some of the other students that we enroll struggle in math and reading. They're performing at low elementary levels. I mean, they do not know their ABCs, their times tables, and I'm not working here from a deficit model. I am working with reality. And the reality is we have 4 or 5 years to graduate these students. Beth made this awesome video that I'm going to show now. This is where I need sound. Are we good on everything? Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's just music.
My name is BFA. What's your name?
Hello, BFA. My name is Mrs. Bushnell. Welcome to Burlington High School.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
The weather is hot. I don't like hot. I hate this hot. The weather is storm and lightning.
Grec. See?
Shoulder, shoulder, shoulder.
1 o'clock, I have breakfast. At 7:30, I get a dress to go to school.
How'd you go? Fast or slow?
Slow.
Slow. Okay. Let's see. Wait, before you start, what sound does the helicopter make?
Wasn't that video awesome? I can't take any credit for it. So, first I'll take questions, if anyone has any.
Commissioner Dodson.
Hi, Susie.
Hi.
Thanks a lot for coming, and thank you also for impressing upon us the urgency of the task at hand. I think that's really important. I have some comments that, like in the way of a question. I understand a little bit about ELL education and the circumstances, and I feel that it's not often that I'm that I'm presenting this community with the conversation where a distinction is made between the young person's academic skill level and their English proficiency level. For example, if a student were to show up tomorrow at 16 years old and they were from Colombia, native Spanish speaker, not a lick of English, but if their pleasure reading in their own language was reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez's, General's Labyrinth, and they did, calculus, I think that they'd figure it out pretty quickly. So that's a very different thing. They have zero English proficiency, but they're in a very different situation. It seems like a lot of our challenges, pretty low academic proficiency exacerbated by English. And so in these difficult budgetary times, greater clarity and greater unpacking of the challenge before us just strikes me that it might help us, because the really pressing thing, my understanding is the academic issues. That's the hard part. And then the fact that they're learning a new, relatively complicated language just is like a layers on top of that. But it doesn't feel to me like the public understands that. Everyone says ELL, and everyone moves forward as if our problem is students that don't speak English. That's part of the problem, but the larger problem, it's easier to learn English than it is to learn to read, especially when you're 16 or 17 years old, right? So I don't know what help we could provide, but I don't think the public conversation about this challenge for the district, which is growing, is picking it apart for people, the uninitiated, who don't have a sense of these distinctions.
So one thing you can do is come to my class and understand this for yourself so that you can talk about it.
That'd be great. I'd love to.
The reality is that almost every single one of those students in the class are undereducated, so undereducated. I'm talking about what I said, don't know their ABCs, don't know their times tables, and they're 17 years old, and we have 4 years.
Is it accurate to say so that's really not an English language problem?
Well,
it's
it is.
masking.
It is and it isn't, right? I mean, you also have to learn how to do stuff in English. You do. You have to learn content in English, right? Chemistry, biology, calculus, whatever you have, social studies, that's all presented in English. So you have to have English and you have to have schooliness. We call it schooliness in our little world. And a lot of our students don't have schooliness, or if they do, it is not at all like American schooliness.
Thank you.
Commissioner Seguino.
Thanks very much for that. That was really incredibly informative. Can you give me a sense of what the time frame is for students to acquire proficiency in English once they've come here? Yeah, I understand that kids might be starting at different places, but so you have them for a period of time, but then what's their trajectory in terms of English language proficiency?
It depends on their former education.
I see.
I have some students who come and can exit in a year, and I have some students who come who don't have a prayer in exiting. We could educate them for years. And because they don't have it, they don't have any academic literacy in their first language. I'm not trying to be negative, I'm trying to be real. This is real.
Thank you, thanks.
Commissioner Stoll?
I had two questions. I think I heard you say that it's a 90-minute block. So what does the rest of their day look like?
Good question. The students are in, so this class meets every day, so it's 90 minutes a day. They are also in a math class. Some of them are in an ELL math class, and some of them are in other math classes, pre-algebra, things like that. They are also in an introduction to computers, technology type class, and they are in a reading class, literacy or reading, and usually PE. They have limited schedules as we have limited ELL teachers. And once they exit this Excel program, which is not exiting ELL, that just means they can speak to you and not have a deer in the headlights look. They are added to usually ELL Science, ELL Social Studies, and ELL English 1, so their schedule gets a little bigger.
My second question is, I'm just curious sort of socially what it's like for the kids when they first come in, and if there's any program or any particular approach to helping kids to socially integrate.
It's hard. Socially, it's very hard. There are language majority minorities, right? So right now, Nepali is a language majority, however you want to say that. We have a lot of Nepali speakers. Arabic is a language minority. You know, there's like 5 Arabic speakers. And, you know, so we have, depends on who you are, where you come from, and your language background. It's really hard socially. One thing that is not mentioned in all of this, but we work really hard on community building in our class, so that the Somalis don't sit with the Somalis and the Nepalis don't sit with the Nepalis, and we work really hard on that. There are no specific programs in our school this year. We're hoping to have advisories next year, which will start to address some of these things, hopefully.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Curry?
I just wanted to kind of speak to that question and point a little bit. Maybe you could share a little bit more of your knowledge, and thank you for coming. I know you're in an incredibly difficult position when the odds are against Burlington, given the rest of the state conversation and funding, but thank you for your commitment. So I'm just aware that my son was on the high school soccer team this fall, and there was a student who, you know, I believe is in your program, but he had the opportunity to play soccer because he was a wicked soccer player. And so I know he struggled. It was very hard for him to understand the instructions, but you know, I think that it's just something that we need to keep in mind as we look at the budget, and athletics is not funded by the state, it's funded by local funds, and that was an opportunity for him to really participate socially, even though it was a struggle, but because the soccer team was there for him, you know, he was integrated into that right away.
Sports are awesome for the boys. Yep, you are right. For the girls, we need to work harder.
I just wanted to say, I like how you've taken the PBL model that has been, you know, come statewide, but also particularly here in Burlington and Winooski through the Partnership for Change, and really embedded that PBL model in your in this classroom. So it's good to see. Thank you.
Thanks. So I just want to finish with the class meets every day. These are the times. I will share this with Brian because I have your email, and will you share it with everybody else? We want you to come. You don't have to let us know, just show up. We want you to see this.
Do you want us to, is it okay if we stop in for a short amount of time?
Anytime.
Do you want us
come, stay, whatever, just come, because this is real, and you need to see it.
Should we bring anything?
Nope,
I mean,
just come, and be prepared to not just watch, you know, really get engaged.
Thank you very much, Susie. Appreciate you coming.
Thanks. Thank you all.
I'm going to go ahead and go back to the comments I was making beforehand about the election, just to clarify. So the districts, the 4 new districts that are being created will be 2-year terms from town meeting day 15 to town meeting day 17. The wards are going to be 3-year terms, town meeting day 15 to town meeting day 18. The wards will then be elected on even years going forward, the districts on odd years going forward. Election is the 3rd of March. The 26th of January is the day that petitions need to be in to the clerk's office here in this building, and those petitions are available online at this point for anyone who's interested in doing that. We had on our agenda today, Bobby Riley was going to come present from IAA, but I don't think that they were able to make it. So I hadn't heard back from him today. So we will.
They have an event.
Oh, yes, they do.
Okay.
Yeah, they have their.
They do.
Fill the bowl.
Fill the bowl is tonight. Oh, I'm sorry about that. We'll get them back at another time. At this point, we're going to move on to the superintendent's report then. And what I should have done at the beginning of the meeting and didn't is officially introduce Dr. Smith, who's been with us now for 3 weeks?
Not quite.
Not quite, almost 3 weeks. And
I mistakenly said 3 months today. It kind of felt like just 3 weeks.
So in 3 weeks, we felt your presence and appreciate it, and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, I've certainly had an introduction the last couple of days, lest I was confused that I am north. dealing with some weather issues, and I know there's been some speculation on just what criteria do we use and all that sort of thing. I'm not going to go into that tonight. I try to reassure people that we have some and we try to do the best we can. In the time that I've been here, I've just been really struck by, people like Susie who are just often just very quietly doing some incredible work for children in this community. And also I've started to meet people, members of the community, who are involved in all kinds of organizations that, again, are very dedicated to, in simple terms, just doing good work for kids and families. And it's the other thing that I've been struck by, and you'll see that when captured in our goal statements, there's a lot of very well-researched work going on. There, as you start to find out what it is people have chosen to do, the kinds of programs that they're working with, or the principles behind the programs, and these are, proven, kinds of approaches to real issues, and they're in many cases they're cutting-edge kinds of approaches as well. So that there's clear evidence that people have been doing their homework, and they've been working very hard to come up with a wide mix of programs and services to meet a wide variety of needs. And I think a challenge for us is to treat all of the components, the emerging sort of, I used the word before, tapestry that we're seeing kind of being woven before us, to find ways to see that as an asset, not a liability, quite frankly. It's sometimes, we tend to look at needs in terms of challenges in a way that are problematic, and yes, they are, but when you go around the classrooms and you see the mix of children working together and doing things together, these are kids who will be prepared to be successful in the future. And I'm also hearing anecdotally that colleges and universities actually throughout the country know about Burlington. From that perspective, they know that students coming out of a place like Burlington actually are unusually well equipped for success in a variety of ways in the post-secondary world, not just academically. In fact, in ways that give them a little bit of leg up on students who come from situations that aren't as diverse and sort of as global in their outlook. So we can see benefits from that. We are, addressing a lot of challenges, and we'll get into them in a minute in terms of the budget situation. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity to start out by acknowledging that we have all of the raw ingredients here. And the way I look at it, in a place like Burlington with the resources, the talent available, if we can't figure it out, who the heck can, figure it out? And you've got a lot of people working very hard to do that. I think also what we're seeing is, though, to some extent, and this is reflected, in some of the challenges we face with the budget, a lot of people doing a lot of things sort of simultaneously, and in ways that require each one of them deserves a lot of focus of resources, not just money but time. So that's also a challenge. How do you make sure that you are allocating not just money behind things, but time to do it right? And that has implications, I think, for choices that we have to make that won't just be based on, on financial resources alone, but also the resource of people's time and focus to make sure that what we do take on, that we can support in a variety of ways. I think I'm going to just go, right into some of the issues that are certainly foremost on a lot of people's mind. I was struck by a relatively tight timeline in terms of putting together a budget in New York. The budget vote was in May, so having to back up the whole sort of cycle and thinking about putting together a budget and having something ready essentially by the end of this year in early January is certainly is a challenge as well. But one of the first things we encountered, and we're going to talk about sort of two categories of issues. One has to do with this year and one has to do with next year. one of the first things we encountered was, and we've been very transparent about this, the auditor's report is available on board docs, and we also had I think the board very wisely brought in an independent consultant who looked at our financial situation. That report is available publicly on board docs as well. In both cases, the conclusions that these folks were drawing was that with regard to this year, our current year, that some of the same issues that had contributed to some over-expenditure relative to the budget in past years were still in play. And there was a fairly high likelihood that just moving along without making any changes this year would produce a similar result, namely overspending the budget again. And independently really of that, in parallel to that, our new finance director, Nathan Lavery, had pretty much reached the same conclusion. So, unfortunately, one of the first official acts when I came here was to acknowledge that reality and say, look, we have to put the brakes on discretionary spending, and that includes hiring as well as other forms of spending, and try to get our arms around the situation. So we did, in fact, initiate a budget freeze, and that just saying it doesn't make it happen. We've used the analogy, the classic analogy, you can turn the switch off on the engine of a big ocean tanker that's cruising along the ocean. It doesn't stop immediately. So there's a need, which we recognize, to back it up with a lot of good procedures. So I'm going to ask our finance director to speak to first a little bit about just some of to highlight for folks the kind of work that we're doing to make sure that in fact we can be very cautious about spending so that we can try to bring expenses in line with what's budgeted. And then I'll also have turn your attention to some of the factors that we are addressing that specifically contribute to the potential for over-expenditure and what he's doing to begin looking at that. So it's Nathan Lavery. I'm going to turn it over to you. He's not Alan Matson or Charlie Rivers.
Despite the physical resemblance. So I'll just, in broad strokes, give you a sense of some of the things that we have been looking at, particularly with respect to the FY15 budget. That's been an area where getting the type of data we would all hope to have available to us has been a challenge. And so we have worked with all of the department and principals and asked them to provide some feedback based on budget information that I provided them. And using that, we were able to identify a number of kind of general issues in the FY15 budget. And I detailed them on a memo that appears on board docs. But just generally, we're talking about issues where we have budgeted funds insufficient to cover expenses that we can relatively easily project for the current year. And there are a variety of reasons for that, but that's just one obvious way that is, that's creating a challenge for us in FY15. We've also seen things that are a little more nuanced than that. Sometimes there's use of account codes. That's how we code expenditures that might be in that might not be in the proper place. And that doesn't mean that there's anything untoward going on. It just means that it's difficult to figure out exactly how much we'll spend on a particular type of expenditure when we're recording it in a number of different ways across the district. So some of these are just elements that we'll be able to deal with in the future through better training as well, that folks haven't been trained on this kind of stuff. But again, for the current fiscal year, it creates a problem. And another area that we've seen some struggles with is the accuracy of the payroll encumbrances. So theoretically, we should be able to know everyone is in our position database accurately, and we should simply be able to project how much they'll cost us, salary and benefits, over the course of the fiscal year. And right now, that simply is not the case. That's one of the areas that I believe the board has heard about in the past. And as I mentioned, we have actually planned to get some training from the Munis trainers. Those are the folks who train in our accounting software, so that we can both understand how to use that system properly and get the data that's in there now cleaned up and corrected so it can be used in a useful way. So that's something that we've already tentatively scheduled for March. So that's just a general overview of the types of issues we're encountering. There are specifics here and there, and sometimes we encounter issues where it works out in our favor, where we say, well, we'll have more money in this line than we anticipated, but obviously it's easy to, as you can imagine, have it offset by other areas where we know that we don't have enough budgeted. So each day it's a little different, and I feel like I'm starting to get my head around kind of what the total picture looks like, but at this point it's still a very preliminary look, and a lot more work's necessary in that respect.
We want to just highlight also, we had the first bit of good news this week in that most of the areas you identified were risks of over expenditure, and we finally today, after some good work, Paul Irish and his department, to actually come up with some areas where we didn't have to spend as much, or we could project that we would not have to spend as much was budgeted through some approach. So you want to just highlight that one?
Sure, and we owe it to the hard work that Paul did in looking carefully at the property services budget, but he was able to identify a series of different factors, different moving parts in the budget, but ultimately carve out probably on the order of about $500,000 from the current year's operating budget that we can not spend this year. Money we had budgeted to spend that we can not spend. It's largely through reductions in preventative maintenance, which is obviously not something that is, and as I noted in the memo, it's not something that's sustainable long term, right? We can't not do preventative maintenance, obviously. But because last year we actually overspent that, the amount that we had budgeted for preventative maintenance, we did roughly $500,000 more preventative maintenance than we budgeted for. So that creates an opportunity here to cut back in that area this year in order to help us deal with the pressing FY15 problem. So again, I want to emphasize that's not something that serves as a foundation for the FY16 budget, the budget we're developing now. But it is one of those things that we identified as an opportunity to help address the challenges this year. So I think it's a step in the right direction, and we owe Paul thanks for the hard work, especially because I kind of stood there and pressed him to do it when he had many other important things to do. So I appreciated Paul's responsiveness on that, and it was certainly a step in the right direction.
So I wanted to make sure we illustrated that point because, if we can't get to that point, then we're just going to be doing a lot of hand-wringing and, tearing out of hair and that sort of thing. It's not going to really get us anywhere. We're just going to be looking at a lot of potential negative numbers. Obviously, we have to come up with solutions. And so this was a not insignificant step in that direction. And the good news, this is not something that has anything to do with direct programs and services for kids. So, that's something where we just don't want to, it's a place where we don't want to go. And so it's illustrative of the kind of work that we're going to be continuing to do in an effort to try to, get to the point where we can say with some confidence that we can project spending in line with the budget that is in place. So we're going to pause here on just the issues related to FY15 and see if there are any questions or comments before we get into FY16.
Commissioner Curry.
I have two questions. One is, could you help me understand this allocation to the fund balance of the 897?
Yes.
In the 15 budget, that I understand the residual 300,000, which I thought was kind of the last we heard deficit, but I'm not understanding how the 897 relates to the 1.2 million that we.
Sure. So for folks following along, this is on the spreadsheet document. It looks like this. And if folks have it on
FY15 budget update is
right. It's under the FY15 budget update.
Oh, it's up. Good. It's up.
Great. Perfect. So what Commissioner Curry is referring to is the second line under the expenses section of the spreadsheet, where there is a negative $897,000 figure. The good news is that in this context, the negative number is actually a good thing. what that represents is the difference between the $1.2 million that was budgeted to go toward retirement of the net fund balance deficit and the actual audited net governmental fund balance deficit of about 302,000 and change, or something, about 303,000. So in essence, what we're doing here is identifying funding that we don't need to put toward the retirement of that fund balance deficit, and up here showing it as money that we can use to help offset that rather long series of additional expenditures in FY14 that we know were either not budgeted for or were inaccurately budgeted. So there are a number of things in the list. You see the list looks familiar, but that's one way that we can help cover some of those costs because we don't have to put it toward the fund balance deficit.
And just to emphasize that point, I think another way of thinking about that, it's sort of like a preemptive strike against having another fund balance. Because if we can't figure out a way to offset unbudgeted expenses, then we're going to be in trouble.
Commissioner Curry.
Thank you. And my second question is that there have been a number of conversations, starting with an email to the full board from a couple of parents, and then a conversation at the last Finance Committee, and then Patrick and I were on a Channel 17 show where the topic came up again. But there's been a repeated suggestion to charge for parking permits at the high school, which would generate revenue and also create some equity in the transportation situation that, you know, the families who have to buy bus passes. Have you all given more consideration to that? And if so, what's your current thinking?
I know that there's some discussion of that item in particular among, I think Amy Mellencamp and maybe Victor Prusik did kind of bat around the idea. It wasn't my impression that that was something we had been directed to do by the board, and certainly if you folks want us to do that, you can give us that direction, but I'll just tell you that I haven't spent any additional time other than reading their emails about what they thought would work and what they thought the kind of wouldn't work about that idea.
Actually, some the analysis has been done, and there, like a lot of things, the devil is in the details, and also what seems like on the face of it a concept that could translate into something workable. There are any number of reasons why it's not necessarily the case. Also, the capacity to generate real dollars relative to the number of students who currently drive and or who might not continue to drive if there was a fee increase is not significant enough to put enough of a dent in if we were to say we're trying to offset the issue in terms of being able to reallocate or find another source of revenue to pay for to help out with the busing. So we can get back to you with more detail because we have done some work on that. But I know that we ran into some problems which suggested that it may not be a real fruitful area to get into.
Commissioner Stoll.
Yeah, mine is a follow-up on Liz's first question. So the use of the $800,000, I'm just curious about if there's any legal issues around using something that was originally earmarked as deficit reduction for operating expenses. I'm not necessarily against it or for it at this point. I'm just curious as to whether that's been looked at.
So we did have a conversation about that, and while it certainly is worth revisiting so that we can feel we're ironclad, but my understanding essentially is that the $67.4 million, as we said, it was the total voted budget, and that ultimately is what we have. That's kind of the box we have to work in. And so it was certainly clear that the original, concept for adding that money in was toward retirement of that fund balance. But the guidance we've received to date has suggested that we don't have to do that if it's not a expenditure that we actually have to make.
It'd be great just to make sure that we were clear on that. I just am recalling when we were first looking at budgets last year that sometimes that deficit was looked at slightly differently than the rest of the budget, and it was sort of taken off the top. And so I just want to make sure that was explained to me by the prior finance director, that was done for a particular reason. So I would just maybe ask if you could just come back in and reassure us that that is in fact
Sure.
to do. And then I think there's the question of whether the board's comfortable doing it or not, but I'd first like to get through the first gate. Thanks.
Commissioner Dotson.
I was wondering, Nate, and you may not have time for something with this intricacy, but so I hear you talk about deficit, and then I hear you talk about unbudgeted expenses. In terms of the layperson and not getting into accounting rules, is it fair to say that either way, they both create situations where it requires real dollars to reconcile them, and that is the prudent thing we need to do one way or the other. So for the person who doesn't really care about accounting rules, whatever, are they kind of similar in their need to be reconciled and finding the dollars to do that reconciliation?
Sure. I mean, I should probably be more consistent, but for the purposes of the analysis we've been doing, one of the things I've looked at are situations in which we have budgeted a certain amount of money, and whatever number that is, and figured out if we can we reasonably project that our expenses will exceed that amount. And sometimes that budgeted amount might have been zero, as is the case with some of the things on this list. We simply did not budget for them, but we know now we're going to have to spend them. So that's what I'm talking about when I say they're unbudgeted expenditures. When I talk about the deficit, I'm really thinking kind of, for example, in FY15, right now, we're projecting a budget deficit as a result of the accumulation of all of those expenditures where we either didn't budget enough or we didn't budget for them at all. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to portray, is we have a series of items. And there, as we talked about, there are some situations where we're going to actually have more money available in certain types of expenditures than or I should say, we budgeted more money than we will need to spend. But what we've focused on so far, and what we found a lot of instances of, is the opposite, where we are going to need more money than we have budgeted, and the result of all of those needs is to put our total FY15 budget in deficit, and that's what we're working to resolve through this analysis, through the budget freeze, that sort of thing.
Because once it's all said and done, a overspent budget, when we find out we spent X, we only budgeted Y, that would become a deficit.
That would be
unreconciled.
Right. Yeah. That could, right, unless we had a massive fund balance against which we could draw down. But.
Just want to add emphasis to something too, and we've been kind of going in layers. So, for example, when Nathan's talking about getting down to reconciling what's budgeted and what the real likelihood of expenditure is. I mean, he's actually gone line by line now and identified any area at risk, and then we've sent it back to the folks who have responsibility for the spending in those areas, and given them a checklist, like a sort of a due diligence checklist that they have to go through to sort of say, all right, what are the alternatives? First of all, are we correct in identifying this as risk? That based on what you're seeing, is it in fact likely to be overspent? If so, the rest of it essentially has to do, well, what are we going to do about it? Can you reallocate money from another budget line to cover it? Can you not do something you're planning to do? Can you do less of something? All of those things, we're sort of asking people to go through a series of questions and guide their thinking and to make sure that everybody considers all of the options around any area of risk. It doesn't matter whether it's a few dollars or a few $1,000 or whatever. We're basically, nickels and dimes are fine, thank you very much. Anybody who wants to send them in, we'll take them. So it's not, in spite of, we have a budget that seems like a big number, it doesn't mean we don't care about all the small stuff because it adds up. So that's the level of detail, but you can imagine on an operation our scale, trying to get to that level of detail, it doesn't happen overnight. So it is, it's an ongoing process.
Commissioner Seguino?
A couple of questions, Nate. One is, last year we budgeted $150,000 for contingency. Wonder if that's reflected in here.
So that's not reflected in here anywhere. And one question, since that's news to me, I would wonder is where that contingency was in the budget. So I might reach that point, or it's possible that how it was entered into the accounting system is in such a way that, you know, it doesn't stand out on its own. But ultimately, as we move through the process, we will, whether knowingly or not knowingly, like come across that money where it exists. So it's kind of like we'll find it when it's just a question of when.
Okay. Just one other quick question. So I see on here $350,000 for unimplemented cuts. Can you just give me a couple of examples?
That's actually more of a holding place number that represents things that we think are probably out there, but we haven't identified yet. And so as we identify, as we complete this process, like at the end of this process, that probably won't exist. That'll probably be brought down to zero, because theoretically we will have identified all of those situations where it didn't happen and we can kind of put a name on them. Right now, that's my attempt, kind of as you try to build a contingency into the budget, that's my kind of contingency to say, are there things out there that we just haven't identified yet, and we want to be cautious before we conclude that we have the money to spend on things. So that's a placeholder. It's not tied to a specific thing. As we've identified specific things, we're trying to name them so we understand what happened and can be on the lookout and avoid it in the future.
Before I see two other hands up here. I just people have already asked questions. Are there any of the board members who haven't asked a question yet who would like to? Commissioner Stoll, Commissioner Curry.
Just one follow-up and then one clarification question. Superintendent Smith, you were talking about going to different people, and this was mentioned at the beginning, and asking people to clarify what their needs were and asking people to go through their budgets. I know this is a new exercise for this district, and I really applaud you for starting this out. I think it's a wonderful step. I'm just wondering if we can just have a little more clarity, not about the specific people you're going to, but the levels you're going to. So, for example, are you only going to principals, or are you also going to program directors, just so we have more of a sense of who's actually answering the questions for you?
Nathan, you want to speak to that a little bit in terms of the different kinds of folks who are looking at these lines?
Sure. So when I distributed had distributed kind of this follow-up line-by-line information where I highlighted questions, and I said, you know, essentially, like I would highlight whether or not we're over budget in a particular line already, or whether there's a risk of overspending based on how much we have budgeted this year versus how much we actually spent last year. So I kind of put this together, and that was distributed to everyone who is essentially in charge of a budget area. So that is both principals as well as directors of various departments, whether they're at central office or for the most part in those cases. So that's the level at which the information is distributed. Practically speaking, I'm sure that a lot of folks, particularly principals, review that in consultation with their admin assistants and the folks who kind of work on a daily basis in the accounting system. So I wasn't, you know, I'm not sitting beside them. That in the memo we talked about the next step being needing to go in and meet with them individually, because what we found is that there's varying degrees of familiarity with how to access some of the information, and folks kind of, I think, did a pretty good first pass through the numbers, but, you know, in doing so, they had questions kind of coming back to me and saying, what's this number, why is it here, you know, I don't understand where that came from. And so part of my job over the coming weeks will be to go and sit down with each of them and walk through line by line and make sure that we all kind of get on the same page about whether, you know, the money budgeted in a particular line is appropriate. To an extent, that happened with, you know, with Paul, although he was well ahead of, you know, the game at that point, but, you know, that helped contribute to identifying the $500,000 that we actually can save in that area this year. So it's, you know, it's kind of happening in steps, where we started at a really kind of macro level looking at big picture items, and then we've been drilling down to more granular levels of detail as we start to know where to look.
A glass half full side effect of this is it's educational. You know, if it helps if you are have authority to spend money to understand more about how that works and how to manage it and how to keep track of it, how to understand what contributes to how much money is in a budget and the factors that can influence the rate at which it's spent. So this is, and I give people a lot of credit because they are, there are kind of a lot of sort of aha moments or then, questions or that are coming up, and they're being good about saying, you know what, I need to know more about this, and you get to the point where it can't just be another memo from the, from our business office, so that's, Nathan's getting ready to, go out and sit down and do some face-to-face work, and really help bring people along in their understanding as well, and in the process, for our benefit, trying to sort out things enough so that we can start to speak with increasing specificity about what we're really looking at in terms of a potential deficit.
Thank you. My second question is just in scanning the list, there are two large numbers that jump out. The QSCBs and the health insurance, both over $500,000. And I just wonder if you could just take a moment and clarify those a little.
Sure. So the QSIBs is that kind of awkward acronym. That's how we pronounce it. But that is a complicated kind of situation. But in essence, it reflects a method of budgeting that was used in the past that we're moving away from. And so if you'll see, there's actually a line on the revenue side, and kind of in the middle of the revenue list, that shows a $583,000 revenue, and then you see that the $760,000 expense. So in essence, the current year's budget didn't explicitly budget the revenue or the expense. So if you were to look at the net impact of those two figures, you'd be looking at roughly a $200,000 net problem in the FY15 budget.
And what does QSCB stand for?
Qualified School Construction Bonds. And they're kind of I don't know a lot of the details, so I'm not going to say too much other than to say they're a type of bonding that we can use that has some federal subsidies that are associated with it. We get certain rebates, and so it's a tool that can be used, and we just need to kind of straighten out the way they're budgeted. And so, again, the net impact of those two lines is only kind of a $200,000 problem. But right now, I've separated those into revenue and expense. And in future years, when those are budgeted properly, it won't be creating the type of problem it creates on paper here.
Great.
I can go into more detail if people want to know, but I won't do it. I won't do it for the group.
That people were aware of what it was, because
Right.
it doesn't clarify.
Oh, and the health insurance, I can just say that's actually mentioned in the memo that's also on board docs under the FY15 update, so folks can read it. But in short, it just looks like the total health insurance expenditures for FY15 were built on an FY14 number that didn't reflect total FY14 spending. So it's kind of the garbage in, garbage out type of cliche to use, but in essence, if we started with a number that's too low and then we said, oh, healthcare is going up, whatever, it went up 4 or 5%, but if you start with a number that's roughly $500,000 too low, you end up, ballpark that amount off again in the next year, and that appears to be the case in looking at that line across the district, which is another way I've looked at some of these expenditures.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Curry.
Can you just remind us of the fiscal year that this golden handshake was associated with? Was it just a single individual?
No, the golden handshake, and I'm going to invite Paul if needed to help me here, but that actually is it's an expenditure that we have to do in the form of a sick leave buyout. So when people retire, and this is contractual, they're eligible for essentially a payment for accumulated sick leave. The reason that number is so large in FY15 is twofold. One, it appears that we budgeted less for that expense that we incur pretty much every year, but we budgeted an insufficient amount based on kind of our historic experience, plus because of certain other factors, that we have reason to believe there could be more retirements this year, which would actually increase that cost. Now, the good news is, as we dig into that more, and if that turns out to be true, obviously retirements tend to be for folks who are toward the top of the pay scale, and that, that could ease the problem in FY16, which is, say, if we're replacing relatively expensive staff with relatively inexpensive staff, that might allow us to, essentially do a similar amount of work at lower cost. So there could be a benefit in 16, I'll flag that, but for FY15, it looked like we didn't have enough to begin with, and we have reason to believe that FY15 will actually be a higher usage of that, kind of contractual benefit than is typical. So those two things playing together led to that estimate.
Anything else on 15 before we go to 16? I'll have you stay there, Nathan, in case we need you, but I just, I think you're beginning to get a sense of the kind of work involved. I want to thank Nathan and his staff. This is not something that they do in an 8-hour day. I don't have to worry about, I've been leaving the office fairly late, but it was explained to me that if I'm the last one out, I have to do this elaborate thing with the punching in codes and security stuff. So it's a real incentive not to be the last one out, but I don't have to worry because as late as I leave, Nathan is there later than that. So there's no lack of, time and effort being expended on this. It's important for people to be patient. You can appreciate, this is a deliberative approach. I hope you appreciate the sort of, it's very clinical. It's not, but motion doesn't help us with this. It is what it is. The important thing is to get things straightened out for all the obvious reasons. So we need to, kind of continue to give them the time to do that and our support so that they keep doing that. And I want to thank the staff who have been very understanding that, we're in a situation where we'd prefer not to be in, and it requires, everybody to, think differently about how we're going to proceed through the rest of the year. But people have been willing to acknowledge that that's what we need to do. So we appreciate that as well. Switching gears and looking ahead to the FY16 budget. So, I think it's helpful to have just gone through this piece on FY15 because I think it illustrates the problems of trying to simply base your next year's budget on this year's budget. That's not something, as you can appreciate, that it would make a lot of sense to do right now. So with that in mind, and we recognize that very early, the thought was, all right, let's just pause for a minute and in effect, to the extent that there's time available, which doesn't allow for this to be done in the way that you would like it to be done from a process perspective, but you can do some semblance of that, and that has to do with essentially taking a zero-based approach and starting out, and we've had meetings with principals and just getting into their buildings and say, let's go to where the kids are, and let's look at their needs. Let's look at what we're trying to do to meet those needs, and let's rebuild the budget from the ground up, driven by needs. So if anybody asks a question about why there's an allocation there, we can trace it directly back to, well, we've looked at it. We weren't being extravagant in our thinking. We weren't just, throwing resources at this issue. It was a considered choice, but, and we have some backup for why we think that the level of resources that we're allocating to a particular need is appropriate, but it's based, you can trace it back to a series of needs, and you have a very good example of that tonight with Susie's presentation. There are needs that translate to services and programs, and we can have all kinds of debates on what level of resources are brought to bear, and in the public sector, you'll never have all the resources you would like, and that's a given too. We all understand that. So we know from the beginning that we're operating within some constraints. So that does have an impact on, it's a counterpoint, sort of a check and balance as we start to build that those models from the ground up. We also use some benchmarks. We look at, data in terms of other school districts and ratios of staff that are generally applied to address certain kinds of problems to see if we're in the ballpark or if we're starting, to build a model that may not be sustainable, or if in fact our thinking is, we've tried so hard to be responsible that we've actually not resourced it properly. So in some cases, the approach that when you do this, it's not, the important point I think I want to leave with folks about this process is that it's not so driven by this intent to find every possible place to save a dollar that becomes the overriding consideration. When you build it from the ground up, it is what it is. You can, we'll talk about it in needs-based terms, and people, if you want to use different numbers, you're going to have to use different standards around those needs. You have to sort of, change the standard in order to change the number. And so we'll talk about the standards that these are based on. We're going to invite the public to weigh in on some of the standards that we're thinking about next week on the 17th and the 18th at the high school from 7 to 9 o'clock. And I want to repeat that we've been sending a word out every venue and every media that we have available to us, but this is another opportunity to and make sure people understand that we welcome their participation to help us sort of think through what some sort of core standards are that our budget should be based on. But in some cases, for example, we'll find that some of the savings, frankly, needs to be reinvested in an area that's under-resourced. So I'm not going to just, if we arrive at in a particular area where we think we've generated some savings, we're not just going to automatically quickly put all that money over here and say, okay, we've solved that much of a problem, while leaving another area that we've identified as being legitimately under-resourced unattended to. So it's got to net itself out in terms of some offsetting considerations. I think we're already finding areas where maybe, I'll tell you one right off the bat, literacy as a focus in terms of specialized expertise. We've got a lot of people who know a lot of things in a more general sense, and we've got a lot of special needs personnel. We do not have a lot of literacy, specialized personnel and we have some, proficiency issues that we need to address. So there's a case, for example, where you may look at something and say, well, maybe we could do with a little less here, but you know what? If we're also going to deliver in an area in terms of literacy proficiency, we need to make sure we're properly resourced in that area as well. So it can't all be just about subtraction, and it can't be, we can't leave people thinking this is all about like in the process of dealing with constraints, that it's all about sort of taking things away from people. There's some reallocation, there's some value-added notions of looking at this so that in some cases, ideally, instead of going at it like this and this and trying to subtract here and pull, you find something out here that's a different idea altogether, and you move towards that. And people keep talking about thinking outside the box. I actually once attended a little seminar, and the title of it was Thinking Inside the Box. And he gave a very good example, which I won't go into, and I couldn't remember all the details anyhow, but it had to do with Bach and a challenge that he was given in terms of a composition. And there were some constraints placed around it, and it's considered to be one of his greatest works. So, just because you feel like you're constrained sometimes and you're working under a set of constraints doesn't mean that what comes out has to be limited or dumbed down. If anything, sometimes, this can inspire a level of creativity that we can all benefit from and all of our students can benefit from. So, for all of the challenges associated with this in a hard way, there are also some exciting possibilities, and we're getting people, the ideas that they have that are, in some cases are like, it's a proverbial shovel ready. There's, why, you've been thinking about this, it's ready to go. And then the question is, well, if that would solve a problem, what would it take to, to move forward on this? So the other thing, as we look at the budgets, I expect that we'll end up proposing to do some new things. We're going to be responsible about it, and it would be cost effective, and it might involve some reallocation and so forth, but this is not about just saying that whatever we end up with next year will somehow be less than what we have now. And I'll tell you another thing, we're not going to come out and start throwing out a bunch of straw man issues around, we're going to take art away from everybody, or we're going to take music away from everybody, or we're going to cut, all sports and so forth. Any community who's been through any series of constraints, you've had those conversations. I've been in places where we've had those conversations. I think people are tired of those conversations. They're not particularly meaningful because no self-respecting member of a community like Burlington, of all places, would really want to say that they're part of a community that doesn't offer the kind of program for their kids that you would expect any quality educational system. And and if other districts can figure it out, certainly a place with the resources like Burlington and brain power alone, can figure it out. So in that sense, I'm really actually energized and very excited about some of the possibilities. So as far as where that leaves us in terms of the budget process, we are working towards, through this sort of zero-base approach, and we will be able to come out with a budget proposal that essentially reflects what we think best represents a reasonable approach to meeting the needs that we've identified. And I can't tell you now, it wouldn't be responsible given the information we have to say that it would come in at this level, that level, or any specific level. I can say that in general terms, we certainly get that there's an understandable sense in this community, as there is in many places, that the tax base is somewhat saturated. That there are in fact limits, and if you look at, and I spent some time looking at some of the statistics from the census information and so forth in this community, and people are working hard to pay for their schools, and I don't. So nothing about what we're doing, I think, should suggest that somehow people simply aren't stepping up, and therefore the solution is to just, add whatever it is that it takes and expect people to just say fine. But I do hope that by coming out with a budget that we can trace back to needs, not to this year's budget, which you can appreciate why we don't want to do that, but to student needs, then at least they understand where it's coming from. We can have an honest debate about that and go forward. It's going to be a little truncated in terms of the amount of time that we'd like to have, but that's driven by timelines that we don't get to control. So we're just going to work within those. So to wrap up where that leaves us with the process, we will be completing our work on the budget between now and the end of next week, and that will give us time also to factor in some what we hope will be some nice public input as well next week, and some additional staff input, the meetings that we're having between now and then, and we will have a budget ready for the Finance Committee to look at on December 22nd, and do whatever, make some adjustments. It might be a late night, to the extent that we need to make some adjustments, and then to within the sort of the parameters that we come up with through the Finance Committee structure, then that budget will be publicly available and sent immediately to the board as your Christmas present to look at, or whatever holiday you choose to observe. And we'll go through, give people a chance to look at it on January 5th. We're scheduled to have the full board review and hopefully come up with a budget that's also driven by a timeline in terms of having something early enough to send to the City Council, so for the board to be presented before the City Council on the 12th, which again is, particularly since things have been separated now, it's not, it shouldn't be understood as another layer of approval, but it's a part of a process that still exists. And then on January 13th, the board will be asked to act on a final budget that is what we will then be talking to the public about in a lot greater detail as we urge people to come out and vote. So I've talked more than I probably should, and I'm just glad that my voice held up, because last week I couldn't have done this. Started out with a little laryngitis, so I'll open it up for questions.
That's the real reason we delayed our meeting till today.
Right,
Gave you 2 more days to recover. Commissioner Chino.
Did you say there was something on January 5th on a Monday?
There is.
What time is it at?
I don't know that it's
Seven,
set yet,
it's
but-
set at 7 o'clock.
The reason I asked is because we had scheduled a meeting of the Superintendent Search Advisory Committee in which the full board was invited from 6 to 8 to make some final plans and orientation for the interviews. So if we need to, we might need to just talk and figure out how to adjust things.
Okay.
But I wanted to make sure I heard you correctly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry about that conflict. We ran out of dates.
Any further questions?
All right, I'm going to switch gears to...
Move into the committee goals?
Yes. So this is what we really want to talk about anyhow. And I'm going to test out my little... One of the things that I wanted to make sure we were able to do is not lose focus on the important work that needs to be done this year for students and for staff for the organization. We have actually a very good working committee structure that pretty much provides an umbrella and a kind of an organizing framework for a lot of the work that we need to do. So it seemed very logical to work with that structure and organize our work in ways that are aligned to the work of the committee so that everybody's working, it's alignment. What we're focusing on internally lines up with what the work of these committees. And these committees are, are real resources to us as well in terms of our thinking. So, it was all the more important to make sure that we were aligned and not running off, we're doing one agenda and our committees are doing another. First of all, none of us have time to do all that. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So with that in mind, this first one is listed first for a reason. As you might imagine, given the conversation we just had, I'm not going to go bullet point by bullet point. The gist of this is in the finance area, but it illustrates actually what will appear in a lot of the other slides. The items were more or less self-evident, so this wasn't, I want to make sure people understand this isn't me sort of coming in and saying, okay, this should be our agenda for the remainder of the year. This is coming in and working with what exists and just trying to make sure we've got the things that we need to have on our radar more or less publicly to hold ourselves accountable for are identified. These are all areas that come directly from three primary sources, our audit, the independent financial, the work of the consultant, and our own finance director. They're all cleanup kinds of issues after the obvious objectives of trying to get our current budget under control and coming up with a budget that the community can support. The rest are cleanup. We put asterisks because doing all of this could easily overtax the available resources that we have. If we want to really move forward aggressively in these areas, we may need extra help. And that's something we'll be talking about in the Finance Committee to see whether that makes sense. Diversity and equity, I think the two big themes that I've sort of run into so far have to do with finance and then diversity and equity. This, again, is all, it's based on work that we've been doing or we're looking at. The first one I'll just highlight because it wasn't something that had been articulated in this specific way, but this approach seemed like the best way to get at a wide variety of issues because it turns out that we have some kind of outdated guidance when it comes to handling the whole issue of student discipline. And if we try to rely on what's actually in writing, it doesn't really serve us well sometimes in terms of trying to do what we need to do. It clearly needs to be updated. There are even some legal areas where in case law and statute and so forth that need to be sort of brought in as a reference source to make sure that what we do have in our standards make sense in that context as well. So this is a very practical undertaking because there's a product that comes out of this ideally based on the participation of all of the stakeholder groups that you might expect should be involved in work like this, that comes up with a much more user-friendly, much more effective set of guidelines and standards for the whole issue of student discipline. So that was more, coming up with something, a way to kind of get our arms around a lot of isolated issues that we were hearing about under this general heading of discipline. The rest are things, again, that are in place and that need to be reinforced and supported. It's great to have an acronym and say we do this, we do PBIS or whatever, but you have to support it. Everybody needs to know that you're trying to support it, and we need to be able to, report on our progress. In the area of curriculum, again, these are things we are working on. There's nothing new here per se. It's a matter of identifying areas that are capture some of the important work that is already going on, and we highlight it here so that we can use it as a framework for reminding people that these are the areas of emphasis as we move forward. In the area of infrastructure and technology, and this, by the way, this addresses that. You'll see the word accessibility in here. We've flagged that. We get that that's a problem. We get that that's a problem in Edmonds Elementary School. And so that, the word in there, it's not just about maintenance. Accessibility was a very deliberate choice of a word in acknowledging an area of need that needs to be prioritized. There are a lot of issues, as you can imagine, with buildings, the age of some of our buildings. If we wanted to start getting specific, we could have had a long list of potential maintenance issues, but accessibility was one that we felt deserved to be flagged in its own right as a key word there. So that will certainly be important as we go forward in that area. We have a real need, I think, to come up with some long-range planning around facilities. And again, there's some great work, foundational work that's been done. You do not have to start from scratch, but we do have to move forward. Policy and governance, there's some really good work that is going on, particularly some work that can be sort of moderately transformational if we start to get into this whole notion of policy governance, and we have a good example of that, of a board, as close to us as Winooski, who's taken that on. So again, we don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel on that. We can leverage available resources and start to look to see if this is a direction we want to go. It would be very consistent with a lot of the work that we're trying to do, for example, through the Partnership for Change and other initiatives. And these are, again, other sort of more nuts and bolts aspects of the work that committee needs to do. And I'm exhausted at looking at the list. It's nothing if not ambitious. I would like to say, look everybody in the eye and say, don't worry, we'll deliver 100% on all of these. I'm not. I've been around long enough, I have enough gray hair to say that, to not say that. But I think they are all worthy of being on our radar, and to saying it publicly to try to sort of keep us honest in at least having people remind us, you said you were going to work on that. How are you guys doing? So what that translates to in January, for example, is there's got to be an action plan behind each one of these. Each one of these is identified in ways that aren't quite as, some of them more than others can be easily sort of recognized right now as a deliverable. Others have to be kind of reframed in ways that sort of make them more deliverable. And then we work backwards from that. If this is the product, if this is the outcome that we need to achieve by the end of the school year, what do we need to do, by January, February, March, April, May, in order to get those things done? That, again, allows the committees who meet monthly to sort of look at those benchmarks and have a basis for evaluating our progress. So I'll be asking the point people in each of these areas to work with the stakeholders that would be relevant to those areas, not to just go off in an isolated room by themselves and come out with an action plan, because the first part of the action plan is going to be identify who the people are that you involved, and we can make sure that we think all of the sort of stakeholder groups that should be involved were involved in that planning process, and then we'll look at the steps and try to come up with something that's workable. Going through that, it will be sobering because, like I said, this is nothing if not ambitious, and the reality of what it takes to achieve some of these things will sink in. And so it's going to be a challenge, but again, it's all stuff that you are trying to do. It's a matter of trying to organize and see how much of it can we really get done, and also accepting that in some cases, this is, in many cases, obviously, this is not something you just say, okay, been there, done that, now we can just kind of cruise, it's an ongoing process, and for everything we accomplish, it'll just simply be the foundation for something else we need to do. And in some cases, we'll have to say, you know what, this is still a work in progress. We may even get as far as we would have liked to. So we pick up where we left off next year, and we just keep going. So that's where we are with the goals process. I should also stop here. I should have actually stopped at each slide and invited the committee chairs to weigh in on this, the slides individually. But so maybe before we do anything else, if any of the committee chairs would like to address any of those issues first, that would be great.
So let me suggest that we do this. We'll move on to the consent agenda, and then during the committee reports, if committee chairs would like to address some of those, we'll do that. So the consent agenda is in front of you. If we get a motion to approve the consent agenda. So moved. A second?
Second.
All in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Consent agenda passes. And now we'll move, before we move into the standing committee reports, well, actually, we will move into the standing committee reports. I'm going to skip over number 8 because Commissioner Chena took our guest to his hotel, and he'll be back in just a minute. If we could start with the ITC report.
Oh, spectacular.
That's you.
I'm so ready. We had no action items. We did visit more about the Horizons and On Top programs and the need for relocation of those programs. And we discussed St. Joseph's as a possible option or not a possible option. We haven't come to a conclusion either way on that. We need to find some more information about the specific needs of On Top and Horizons, separately, together, however it works out. And so that's where we are on that. And we discussed the needs of accessibility at the Edmonds School. We actually had a presentation from some people come in and speak to it. And it's one of the things that I'd like to look forward to discussing with Paul about next week when we have our ITC, so we can try and start focusing on the bonding issue and how that's going to, how the accessibility is going to play into our bonding issue for this year. That's mostly that's the big hot topic items that we're working on in the ITC. Murray Street's moving forward. It's not done. Still moving forward. That's really it on that. So.
Commissioner Kirk, regarding the 4 bullet points up there, those were developed in concert with the ITC goals, and I didn't know if there's any comments or questions or any elaboration from what Dr. Smith presented earlier.
Most of those things are actually what we're doing right now. Our long-range capital goals has a lot to do with accessibility and functionality of the buildings. Capital plan process, it's more of the same, getting that accessibility and the maintenance under control. Developing space issues at the middle schools is going to become probably more of an issue quicker than the On Top and Horizons programs, the way it's been explained to me. So that's another thing that we're going to work on quite diligently. We have to figure that out. And again, On Top and Horizons. Those are the things we're working on the most to try and get accomplished. There are some other items that people would like us to look at, but 1 year at a time, we only have so much bandwidth. So we hope that these will meet the needs of the public and the community.
Thank you, Commissioner Kirk. Commissioner Seguino.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Superintendent Smith for these so clearly identifying these goals, and what I think align very much with what we have been discussing in the Diversity and Equity Committee. I really appreciate the areas that you focused on. And I'd like to just say a few words about, in general, we didn't have any action items from the Diversity and Equity Committee this meeting this past couple of weeks ago, I guess it was. We did have a presentation by Lizzie McDonald, who's an intern working on restorative justice at the high school, which was very, very informative. And we also heard from Henry Sparks with regard to a review of the district's student codes of conduct. And he indicated at that time that the district would be doing a review of those policies to ensure consistency across schools and practices and so forth. And really this seems to have evolved since then, right? That since that he made that statement, I see this as more evolved discussion of what the plans are. I want to, if I could just make a couple of comments about this. What is really clear is that our district has changed, not only demographically, but also what we know about behavior has exploded in the last 20 years. That in fact, I think describing policies as discipline may be something that is going by the wayside and is really about helping kids regulate and behavioral management. And we have learned enormous amounts about trauma and the impact on behavior, and the approach, the cutting edge approaches really are about helping students regulate themselves and understanding the backgrounds that they're coming from, rather than a punishment model. And what I see in what is described here in terms of the plans for the district this year really is an alignment with that effort to really, I would say, update the district in terms of its achievements in that area. And I think it couldn't be more timely. Several commissioners and several personnel from the district attended a conference this past week on discipline in the school-to-prison pipeline. And it was extremely informative. We heard a good deal about Vermont state law with regard to behavioral management, what the legal rules are for kids on IEPs and disabilities and so forth. And it was very educational, I think, for the board members that were there. We also learned a lot about the impact of suspensions on student trajectory in terms of dropout rates. And we heard a good deal about alternative mechanisms. So I was very pleased to see the discussion about looking at mechanisms to help kids regulate other than out-of-school suspension. So all in all, I'm really pleased with the list that you've created, and I know our committee will be happy to support you on that work. Thanks.
Commissioner Dodson.
Thank you. So in terms of what's been happening and update from our most recent meeting, we've been involved in one conversation that I think speaks to another conversation we're having here, and that is the movement towards thinking about a policy governance model. But in the short term, I think it's about distinguishing the board's governance role versus what we might maybe refer to as the operational role. And so this conversation has been around weighted class rank at the high school. And one of the things we're getting to is that the board is presenting that the appropriate role of the board would be to do something such as make a policy decision that we want to provide a rigorous curriculum to all students that puts them in a position to be competitive in the higher ed process. And that would be the extent of the board's role. From that point on, it would be an operational role of how the high school chooses to carry that out. So part of this conversation is making that distinction, and also just to get to it, we're going to do a little bit of asking the principal of the high school to do a little comparison and just look at how we stack up in providing that rigorous opportunity and preparing our students for higher ed with many of our peer schools locally. And if we compare reasonably, then it would suggest that our current policy is serving, our current manifestation of that policy is serving us well. So that's one thing that we're looking at. Another thing we continue to look at is this idea of literacy in the pre-K to 3 pipeline. Stephanie Phillips, curriculum director Stephanie Phillips, has been wonderful in getting us increasing amounts of information to help us understand what's happening in our schools in that way. We particularly were looking at the Fontes and Pinnell reading inventory and what happens in the spring and what we learn about students reading in the spring, and then when we follow up that with the fall, and particularly looking to see if there's this phenomenon of summer learning loss that happens, and particularly seems to be exaggerated in students who depend on school more for that support around literacy. So we've been just digging deeper on that. The next step is this Tuesday, 7 p.m. we have a meeting, and Director Phillips has arranged for some teachers to come and talk to us about how they use the information they learn to then turn that into instructional strategies to address the challenges they see. So we're excited. We think that's really important. And it's about this data-driven effort. So we've been drilling down on the data, and now we're going to be educated as board members about how teachers are actually on the ground using what they're learning through their assessments to help move students forward. So that's exciting. It turns out that the United Way has also an early learning initiative. They've identified support of early learning as an interest of theirs. So representative from the United Way will join us and talk to us a little bit about that, and we'll be looking for dovetail areas to see what kind of leverage we can have in terms of ways that they're working that are consistent with things we want to do, and provide that leverage there. And then lastly, on that action item, without it in front of me, one other thing. I'll come back to it. But here, I think that one of the things that I most appreciate, and I too want to echo Commissioner Seguino's comments, that this is very helpful, Dr. Smith, but particularly the consistently follow up on an appropriate schedule of classroom walkthroughs. And we hope that what that does is to really strongly establish that working relationship between administrator and teachers, and a conversation, an ongoing conversation about what we're learning through our daily instruction and through assessments, and how we're using that to inform what we do moving forward in a progressive fashion. And that's really, that it feels to professionals very much about support, and that is really, at the end of the day, what evaluation is about, is what happens in those relationships, those conversations, in the effort of doing what I think is the common goal of improving instruction. So that bullet point in particular excites me. So that's something we're going to be focusing on.
Thank you, Commissioner Dotson. Commissioner Stoll?
So I think we've talked a lot about finance tonight, and I don't have a lot to add, except to thank you, Dr. Smith, for laying it out for us. It's very, very helpful. I'd just like to let people know that at the last Finance Committee, we did hear from the auditor, and anyone who is interested in looking at the specifics of the audit report or the management letter that went along with it, it is on board docs. It's on in two places. It's actually on our last Finance Committee meeting, but I'm pleased to say, I believe it's also on the budget page. So I would really like to thank Finance Director Lavery for something he did this week, which was to take all our budget information and to compile it and put it on the budget page on the website. So at this point, anyone interested in any budget-related details, reports, can go right to the budget page from the homepage of the website. It is great to have that, really good for the school board also, because now we have everything we need to see on one page, and I really appreciate that. It's very helpful. And he's going to continue to be updating it, and I think through this budget process, as we get information, from example, from the public workshops and other things, that will be put on the website. So I'd like to thank you for that. In that vein, I would just ask everyone on the board, invite everyone to come to the next Finance Committee meeting. If you are interested in being there, we're welcome to have you. We frequently have more than the Finance Committee, and that's great. That's on the 22nd. I also invite the public. At that time, we will be getting the budget that Dr. Smith was talking about, that they will have been working on and compiling, and we'll have folded into it the community input piece. I think that is all I have. I guess in terms of these particular points here, I just want to assure everyone that from my standpoint, and I think the standpoint of the Finance Committee, this really does cover the key issues that we need to look at. I want to also let everyone know that many of these things come right out of the audit and out of the report that Ed Gomo, a finance consultant who's been working with us, came up with. And these are, as Dr. Smith said, they are large-scale ways of talking about it. Beneath each of these are specific things that we will be talking about in finance and that the administration will be bringing to us. So I would encourage anyone who has specific issues about the audit or other things to not feel shy about bringing those up in the Finance Committee. We'll be talking about them in more detail there. So thank you.
Do you have a question for?
No, I'm going to go back to
a real quick question for you, Commissioner Stoll. I know the auditor had talked about coming back at this point, there's been no schedule for that.
No, but that is something that will be on the agenda at the next audit committee that we will be talking about if at this time is the right time to ask him back, if we need to ask him back, and part of that will come out of the recommendations from the administration because they will have had more time by then.
Commissioner Dotson.
Yeah, I do want to apologize. There was one relatively new item, which is why I overlooked it, but I think it will be of interest to people. And this, I think, was very well addressed by Dr. Smith when he talked about budget FY16 and that we would be looking to do things that are about meeting needs of students, and that's the first and foremost thing. It's not just cuts and additions, but standards and what's happening. So in the same way, in thinking about the impending bubble demographically that's moving through the system and that we're anticipating to hit the middle school, there's a programmatic initiative that's being discussed that is about providing a exciting opportunity for learning for students, but that has the added benefit that if it were to be brought to fruition, would probably help to alleviate some of the crunch issues. So, so that initiative will also be on the agenda at this Tuesday's Curriculum Committee meeting.
Thank you. Could I just say it? Please. And that's an example of some things that I'm finding that I think it's really important to encourage, and it's sort of in my mind comes under the general heading of let Burlington be Burlington. Use it, you know, celebrate it, leverage it, and come up with things that you wouldn't do somewhere else necessarily. And I'm seeing some of that already. It's very exciting, and there's you know, this notion of thinking differently about you know, educational possibilities for middle school kids is another example of that same kind of thinking. And you know, again, it's in spite of the numbers, you know, it's not about they're really. I'm surprised that I'm not more depressed than I am at this point as far as the numbers, just because of all of the other good energy that exists and all the good things that people are doing.
Commissioner Truman.
Thank you. Dr. Smith, I did want to say thank you too. I personally, as a committee chair, got a lot out of your presence at our last committee. It was helpful in distilling our priorities, at least to me, with the overlay of the challenges that the district is facing right now. So I think as we're developing our actions, it's going to be based, you know, being cognizant on the demands placed on the administration and staff and on other board members as well. So some things will take longer than others as we break things down. I'm not going to go through the minutes of the meeting. They're there to the extent, to the detail that we could develop on board docs. If you have any questions about anything, let me know. In particular, and of course a lot of it is sitting on the slide, there's a harassment policy that on the advice of a school attorney we need to take up. There was some question as to whether we would need to do that this month or can put it off a little bit. I've gotten some information today that indicates that we may need to meet on that this month because it just doesn't time well with January and later in the month. So, but that's, the committee can work on it. And that'll be something that we would bring to the board for January or February. We're going to be prioritizing, as is so many of the committees and the rest of the board, the finance policies recommended by the audit report. Going to be looking to the superintendent to bullet for us what those are, and so that we can prioritize how best to approach that and a timetable for that. So that's a conversation that we can have as well. And I do want to thank many of the members, in particular, Commissioner Seguino, Commissioner Shumsky, who have been helpful in keeping me focused, as with the rest of my committee, on developing a superintendent evaluation tool. As I've said before, we were on the cusp of bringing a proposal for evaluating the interim superintendent before the leadership change. That changes and impacts the time frame for what we want to do and how we want to do it. You could look at the minutes to see some more detail on it, but what the committee is going to be looking to do and will bring forward for how best to evaluate and review the interim superintendent is basically that the board as a whole, either during a meeting or we'll have a conversation, independently with members to discuss the goals, and with Dr. Smith for his priorities and our priorities for him. Develop a set of benchmarks, points of check-ins on that. So it's more of, as we were envisioning earlier, a conversation as opposed to an evaluation process, because it's hard to take a look at the brand new car and evaluate it when you've only had it for a couple of months. But so far,
Won't look
it's very
that new
nicely,
after a couple of months.
That's right. I'm glad you got snow tires. The committee's going to work with, figure out how to work with the planning committee to kind of retool that process and come up. The other piece of it, obviously, will be how to establish and review the evaluation process for the permanent superintendent. Again, we faced a similar issue of time, that policy lays out dates and benchmarks that will not apply with the new permanent hiring. Fortunately for that, I think we do have the luxury of some time on that in terms of developing a process that can be ready for what my hope is the later stages of, or after hiring, for finding the new superintendent, so that that individual will have a sense of what is expected. But really, that's all part of the job description too. So again, it's the expectations for how you will be evaluated is something that we'll have in place, I expect, early on in their tenure. It'll be probably under the guise of another a conversation, but it'll be, I think, a little more a more substantive, year-long process for that individual. So there'll be more on that as we go. For the policy governance, what I would like to do, and again, budget takes up a lot of people's time, and I'm being thoughtful about that, is starting the conversation about what kind of direction we may wish to go. I don't feel it's at a point where there's any recommendation of, yes, we're going to move to a policy governance model, but I think we should explore it in as much depth. And as Dr. Smith mentioned, Winooski has that model. Commissioner Giannone has approached the chair of the Winooski School Board, who's offered to come speak with the committee and offer their perspective about that. There's other folks that we can talk to as well and see how best to get a sense of what that kind of a model would look like conceivably in the Burlington School District. And obviously there are other models to follow as well. So we'll have that process, and I think that'll be something that will be ongoing and will obviously overlap into the next board. The other issues that aren't here, but we're going to continue to do, is board development and structure, professional development issues, and then informal things like we've talked about, maybe setting up times during board meetings, for example, of having someone come in and do a half hour on Robert's Rules. The committee wanted making sure there's materials available before and after such things. I expect items like that. There may be some things that we can do depending on board members' interest, but I think a lot of that falls under training experience and probably makes more sense to start in full in April with the new board. Also, keeping an eye on the board structure. I don't think there's going to be any kind of a need for action until after we see what the new board looks like and get some experience and input from members and planning committee as to does the current structure as laid out in policy serve what the new board looks like? And I think we just don't know those answers yet. I do want to make sure that that conversation includes student involvement and making sure that it's not just how the board functions, but how well we serve and are served by our student members. And I really want to reach out and invite you and Georgia to offer up your thoughts unsolicited or as a part of the process. That's really important to me, so, and I thank you for that. Thank you.
Commissioner Chena, we skipped over while you were helping out. Do you want to, can you give us an update on the, we have it down as ad hoc superintendent search committee, but I would also throw the advisory committee update in there too.
I heard you say ad hoc search committee. What's the other thing you said?
The advisory committee.
Oh, okay. So, where are we at in the search? So where we're at is we have a job posting that is up. If anyone's curious to see it, you can access it through the website for Ray and Associates, who is our search firm. And there's also a promotional flyer that you can download if you're interested. So if anyone in the public would like to see the posting, feel free to look it up on Ray and Associates website. If you have trouble accessing it in any way, please email me and I can help you find it. I'm just thinking, because there's a lot, so I'm trying to think, how do I, keep it simple but informative for everybody. So people can apply for the position through Ray and Associates. They shouldn't contact the district directly. That Ray and Associates is collecting all applications and doing some screening, and then they will forward the information on to the search committee. The position closes on January 9th, so that's when the period for accepting applications closes, and at that point, application screening and interviewing will begin. Public interviews are scheduled for the week of January 26th. We currently have a representative of the search firm visiting us. He was here tonight. Some of you had a chance to meet him. His name is Dr. Michael Rush, and he's based in the New Jersey office of Ray and Associates, and he drove up here today through the storm to meet with us. He's going to be going on a tour of the schools tomorrow. We're going to go to 4 different schools and meet a variety of staff, parents, and community members along the way. And the purpose of his visit is so that so that someone from the search firm can actually come to Burlington and see and experience our school district for themselves, so that they can promote us and so that they can recruit the best possible pool of candidates. So that's really the goal of this visit. So we're going to 2 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. We're doing the most we can in between 7:45 and 2, at which point he has to head south and try to beat further bad weather. So we're hopeful that this visit will give the search firm some more information on the ground, in the trenches, about what's going on in our school district, so that we can get a really great pool of applicants, and hopefully that will lead to finding a really great new leader. So I think I said enough for now. I could talk forever if you let me, but does anyone have any questions? Is there something I'm missing? Feel free.
The applications closed again?
January 9th, 2015.
Commissioner Kirk. Yeah, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
What schools are you heading to, Brian? Do you know yet, besides the high
I
school?
know exactly where we're going.
Tell us where we're going.
I can tell you the full itinerary, but
Just tell
I
me
don't
the
want to give you too
schools
much.
you're
So we're going to IAA. We're going to Sustainability Academy. We're going to BHS, Burlington High School. I'm sorry, I'm falling into the acronym culture. So Burlington High School, and we're going to Hunt Middle School.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Commissioner Curry.
No question, but just again, I want to thank you, Brian, because I know you indicated you're taking the day off.
That is true.
Probably
I'm losing money again.
Personal income
but I believe it's for a good cause. Thank you.
And thank you that there's someone that you're willing and able to do that is really appreciated.
Well, that being said, I'd like to thank the staff and the community members and the parents who are helping out, because this was kind of a quick thing. The search firm had suggested that perhaps they should come visit our district because no one from the search firm has been here. So, how are they going to represent someplace they haven't been? And so they had suggested that, and we had talked about the idea. We'd been going back and forth how to make it work, and then it was pretty quick. You know, I called and I said, we're in a point where we really should do this if we're going to do it before the holidays. And I got a call back saying, Dr. Rush can come, next week. Can you make this happen? And then I contacted the superintendent, the interim superintendent, and immediately the ball got rolling. So a lot of people have been jumping to make this happen. So I'd like to thank, all the principals and staff people, people at central office, parents, advisory committee members, everyone who's been helping. Anyone I missed, too. Thank you.
Again, I just want to reiterate that that the full timeline for the search is available through the district website, and so the larger community can see the next opportunity that they would have to fully participate in that. And obviously, you can participate by by talking to board members, but also talking to advisory committee members as well. Commissioner Truman, you had one thing that you wanted to ask.
Dr. Smith, I'm sorry, I meant to ask this during your report. I was despite my son's best efforts, was in full agreement with the decision to keep schools open. And trust me, he's expressed his thoughts quite clearly to me. But I did have a concern. I was just curious, it's either a rhetorical question for your consideration or if you have an answer. My concern was regarding, in order to ensuring the safety of the children, for example, my street and some of the surrounding streets, the sidewalks had not yet been plowed and weren't plowed until substantially after school was going in. So kids, some slogging through the sidewalks, some on the roads that had been plowed, and it's not clear to me how something like that factors into the decisions for whether or not to close school, if there's, in terms of the coordination with the city to ensure that there is safe and adequate ways for them to get to the school on foot.
Are you talking about mostly this morning as opposed to?
In this case was this morning.
Yeah. Basically, I started the day at 7 o'clock in the morning on television apologizing for that. I'll end the day at 9:30 at night apologizing for that. It got ahead of us. The information flow that we had and the people acted on was out of sync with the on-the-ground, literally reality. So people didn't get started early enough. They underestimated the amount of time that it would take. So we had a plan. In other words, the plan was get out and clear the walks, and we were sure that no problem. And again, everybody made their best effort, but first storm of the season, whatever, there were equipment issues, there were other things, and it starts to sound like excuses. I'm not going to make them. The bottom line is people underestimated what it would take, and by the time we realized it, it was the train had left the station. So we apologize for that because it shouldn't have been that way. We think that, again, when you look at what kind of day it was an appropriate day for school to be open, but we clearly had some work to do to make sure that on the front end that we could do it the right way, and we've learned from that.
Thank you.
Without anything further, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Commissioner Chena, seconded by Commissioner Curry. All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye.